Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Hare Krishna. Welcome everyone. Good morning. Today we continue our study of Srimad Bhagavatam. Today's verse will be Canto 3, Chapter 4, and we will cover verses 5 through 7 today.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Our glories to Srila Prabhupada.
And I'm trying to share my screen, but something is amiss. One moment, I have exclamation marks.
I made you co-host, so I'm not sure why.
The share screen is coming up, but on my desktops, it's just coming up.
Okay, I'll just share it.
Some sort of setting came up that I never saw before. That may have had something to do with it.
Okay, I'll just pull it up and I'll share it.
Sorry about that. Some technical difficulties. Thank you. Okay, so since there are 3 verses, the middle one actually has a purport, but what we'll do, it's a short purport. What we'll do is I'll chant the first 2 and read the purport myself, and then on the third one, we can all chant responsively. So text 5. Tatapi tad abhipretang janan aham arindama prishtaton vagamam vartu pada vishleshanak gamaha. Translation. Yet, in spite of my knowing his desire to destroy the dynasty, Yadu dynasty, O Arindama, Vidura, I followed him because it was impossible for me to bear separation from the lotus feet of the master. Text number 6. Adraksham ekam asinam vichin van daitam patim Shri Niketam Sarasvatyam Kritaketam Aketanam. Translation. Thus following, I saw my patron and master, Lord Sri Krishna, sitting alone and deeply thinking, taking shelter on the bank of the river Sarasvati, although he is the shelter of the goddess of fortune. Purport by Vaicharanarinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Those who are in the renounced order of life often take shelter underneath a tree. The Lord was found by Uddhava in that condition of taking shelter, as do persons who have no shelter. Because he is the proprietor of everything, everywhere is his shelter, and everywhere is under his shelter. The entire material and spiritual cosmic manifestation is sustained by him, and therefore he is the shelter of everything. So there was nothing astonishing in his taking shelter in the way of the unsheltered, who are in the renounced order of life. And then text 7, I'll read 3 times, and then everyone will have the opportunity to chant. Shama Vadatam Virajam Prashantaruna Lochanam Durbhish Chaturbi Viditam Pitakau Shambarena Cha Shama Vadatam Virajam Prashantaruna Lochanam Dorbish chatur viditam pita kausha varina cha shama vadatam virajam prashantaruna lochanam Dorbish chatur viditam pita kausham varena cha. Please chant.
Shyamavadatam virajam prashantarunavochanam Dorvischaturbividatam pitakosham cha.
श्यामावदातं विरजं प्रशान्तारुणलोचनं धुर्भिश्चतुर्भिर्विदितं पीतकौसाम्बरेण च
श्यामावदातं विरजं प्रशान्तारुणलोचनं दोर्भिर्चतुर्भिर्विदितं पीतकोशाम्बरेण च. हरे कृष्ण.
Hare Krishna. Shyamavadatam Virajam Prashantarunalochanam Dorvishchaturvirviditam Pitukoşambarena cha. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Shyamam Vatadam Virajam Prasantarunalochanam Dorbi Chaturbi Viditam Pita Kusham Barena cha.
Okay, synonyms. Shama avadhatam, beautiful with black color. Virajam, formed of pure goodness. Prashanta, peaceful. Aruna, reddish. Lochanam, eyes. Dorbihi, by the arms. Chaturbihi, four. Viditam, being recognized. Hita, yellow. Kausha, silken. Ambarena, with garments. Cha, and. Translation. The Lord's body is blackish, but is eternal, full of bliss and knowledge, and very, very beautiful. His eyes are always peaceful, and they are reddish like the rising morning sun. I could immediately recognize him as the Supreme Personality of Godhead by his four hands, different symbolic representations, and yellow silk garments. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhuttave Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swamini Tanamani Namaste Saraswate Deva Gauravanichani Nirvishesha Shunyabari Paschati Deshatari Om Ajnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Eva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna. So we have the great fortune, of course, there's always so many elevated great souls in this chat. Today we have the great fortune of also being joined by my Guru Mata, Mother Sudamini. She actually asked for this meeting code several months ago, but I accidentally gave her the wrong one. But now she's here. So I ask blessings of all of the assembled Vaishnavas, but especially my Guru Mata, Vishnu Gada Prabhu, Acharya Prabhu also, to please bless me to repeat successfully whatever I have heard from Srila Prabhupada and the other Acharyas. Hare Krishna. Okay, so we read 3 verses today. In verse 5, we have again this concept of being unable to tolerate separation from Krishna. Of course, this is a recurring theme, and it's come up actually quite frequently recently. And it's certainly worth noting, not only for the reasons we've previously discussed, but there's always so many reasons why this is an important thing that we are to understand. If we are not in this state, the state that's described here, where even the thought of separation from Krishna produces severe anxiety, then we are not actually Krishna conscious, right? We may appreciate Krishna, we may be aware of him, we may know it in theory how to behave in order to attain him, and we may even think of him from time to time and even model our behaviors around his instructions. But if we aren't at this stage of being unable to tolerate even the thought of separation from him, we're not Krishna conscious, right? We're on the path to Krishna consciousness, but it's very good for us, necessary for us to understand the difference so that we can truly understand three very important things. The first thing we have to understand is where we are. The second is what our goal is. And then the third is the proper authorized process which we can attain that goal. And I hope these three sound familiar to at least some or all of you. Does anyone want to say the Sanskrit term for these three that I just described? What our position is or our relationship?
Sambandha, Abhideya, Prayojana.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Vishnu Prabhu. Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana. The language of the Vedas describes to us very thoroughly and explains to us what our actual position is. Our actual nature, not our conditioned nature, but our constitutional nature. It also explains to us the actual constitutional position and what the goal is of life. And then it gives us the process to get from where we are to where we want to go. Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana. So it's always worth noting where we are, because if we don't understand our relationship, our position, where we're situated, then we can't actually successfully attain the goal. And there's so many examples that can illustrate why this is true. But anyway, we've covered that many times, so we'll move on. So in verse 6, then, we see how Krishna, although the shelter of the goddess of fortune, that means all opulence, the goddess of fortune, all opulence. And she takes shelter of him. And he is taking shelter under a tree, like one who is in the renounced order of life, or one who has no shelter, as Srila Prabhupada states it in the purport. No possessions. One who doesn't have any possessions. This is what they do. And this is what Krishna is doing, right? And of course, this is no surprise that the proprietor of everything is acting as if he has nothing, because he is, after all, the supreme renunciate, right? There are 6 opulences, and he possesses all of them in full. This is Bhagavan. And the one that we often forget about, the opulence, the often forgotten opulence, is renunciation, right? And Krishna is the model of renunciation. Of course, he's the model of all 6. But in this verse specifically, he's showing us what true renunciation is. It means possessing everything, yet being fully detached from it all. It doesn't mean that in order to be renounced, we have to possess everything. It just means that we have to be completely renounced from whatever it is that is there. We, on the other hand, here in the material world, we possess nothing but are attached to everything, right? That's our struggle. We're trying to control and enjoy things that are not within our power to control or enjoy. So Krishna, being very merciful, is showing us what actual renunciation looks like. And when he does it, it's actually pretty easy to see how renunciation is considered one of the 6 opulences. Otherwise, we conditioned souls, we have this tendency when we hear the 6 opulences, we kind of scratch our heads when we hear about renunciation being an opulence, right? In fact, if we conditioned souls were to get a magical orb and it contains at random one of the 6 opulences, right? I think many of us, if we opened it and were to see that renunciation were in that magic orb, we may close it up and maybe ask for another. Can I take a mulligan on that one? Maybe, basically any of the other ones would be great, right? This is our initial understanding when we think of renunciation, because we're here in the material world. Our conditioned nature is to control and enjoy. And we don't see how renunciation or giving up these things is actually an opulence. It seems counterintuitive, especially in early stages. But when Krishna displays renunciation, right, and there are some examples that we see in the material world of people being renounced and it being, quite attractive. But when Krishna displays renunciation or any other opulences, we can much more easily see how renunciation is one of the 6 opulences. But if we really examine it, without renunciation, all of the other opulences aren't actually very attractive. There are several examples that we can think of just in the material world, based on our experiences. But I'm going to give one that's in Shastra. So Hiranyakashipu. He became so powerful by the mercy of Lord Brahma, by his austerities, that he, who was born in a demon family below Bhumandala, was able to successfully conquer the heavenly realm, everything that's above Bhumandala. But he wasn't at all detached from it. He was quite attached to attaining everything so he could prove a point. The point he was trying to prove was that Lord Vishnu was unfair, that he was actually showing favor. Lord Vishnu killed his brother, and he wanted to retaliate. He wanted some vengeance. So first he said, these demigods who he's always favoring, first I'm just going to take over everything. So Hiranyakashipu was actually successfully running this universe. All of the Devatas had to go off in hiding. And so things were still going on, but it was in a very different mood. It wasn't very attractive. So there are many instances in literature that sort of try to tell this same story. Like Arthurian legend, for example, the legend of King Arthur. There are a lot of versions of the story, but the main one is that there was a time when kings became corrupt, and it was considered that if you have the might or the power, then you have the right to do whatever you want. They say might means right, right? And so King Arthur, on the other hand, his philosophy was that you should use your might for right. You should use your power to do the right thing, not just to do whatever you want. And this shows an element of renunciation, right? So Hiranyakashipu, he was very much attached to controlling and enjoying all of these different things. He wanted to become immortal so that he could conquer Vishnu. He got the next best thing. He thought he was immortal by the different benedictions that he got, and he successfully was able to take over the universe. But since he wasn't renounced, it wasn't actually very attractive. People weren't serving him because they were inclined to out of love. They were serving him out of fear, right? And there's the difference there. So sometimes we get confused by this term renunciation, as I've mentioned earlier. We see someone who has nothing and we imagine that they're renounced, right? And they very well may be renounced, but renunciation doesn't mean having nothing. It means having access to a great deal of things, but not being attached to them, being detached from them. So just like not eating because you are completely full, because you just ate a huge feast, right? So say you just came from a huge feast, there's no way that you could possibly eat anymore. You're waddling out of the prasadam hall and then someone walks up and they have your favorite prep in their hands, right? You're not going to eat it. You can't. You're done, right? But that's not actually sense control. You're completely full. There's no interest because it's no longer sense gratification. It would be torture to try to put more in your stomach, right? So just as not eating because you're full is not sense control, not being attached to something because you've never had it is not renunciation, right? There can't be renunciation. In other words, you can't be detached from something unless you actually had it to be detached from. So we have this concept of what renunciation is, and as I'll explain later, because I mean we jivas we don't really possess much of anything to be detached from. But one story I want to tell, I'm sure all of you have heard this story on the topic of renunciation, is of two renunciates, and they're walking down this path, and the path crosses a river, and there happens to be a beautiful young woman who wants to also cross the river, but she's not able to. So she asks, "Excuse me, dear sirs, gentlemen, can you please help me cross this river?" And of course, the one renunciate, he's thinking, "No, come on, we're renunciates. We can't touch a woman. We shouldn't even be talking to you, right?" But the other one just picks the woman up. They both cross the river, puts the woman down, and then they continue on their way. They're walking. And so after some time, they're walking, and the first renunciate, the one that refused to carry the woman across the stream, he just can't hold his tongue anymore. He's thinking, "I can't believe you just did that. We're in the renounced order of life. That's completely improper. You picked her up and you're touching it. It's just, come on." And the other renunciate said, I just carried her across the stream and put her down. You've been carrying her this whole time." So there's this idea of renunciation that you don't necessarily have to be doing a physical activity to be attached to something, right? We can be externally engaging in activities that look quite renounced, but in our minds, we're laser focused on the objects of our enjoyment. So when we give up something prematurely before we actually understand how to properly engage it in Krishna service, that's called falgu vairagya, or false renunciation. And generally what happens when we do that is we continually think of the object of our desire, and eventually we just go ahead and chase after it. We leave behind our spiritual pursuits and we pursue this object of our attraction, right? We've seen it happen so many times, and it's never a surprise. And of course, as I briefly mentioned before, the concept of renunciation for us jivas, is pretty much a joke because we don't really own anything, right? Ishavasya sarvam. In the Upanishad, Sri Upanishad instructs us that everything is controlled and owned by the Supreme Lord, animate, inanimate. And so we are to just accept our quota, use it properly according to what the Supreme Lord's instructions are, and know fully well to whom everything belongs. So if we try to control or enjoy outside of that, we're actually thieves. So the idea of renunciation for us is actually pretty much a joke because we can't actually possess anything ultimately, right? So even our very selves are part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. So anything we think that we have is merely lent to us. And we don't even have the real thing lent to us, right? We have a reflection of it. So it's along the lines of a child holding a mirror in his hand, and he's looking at the reflection of the moon in his hand in that mirror, and he thinks he's holding the moon. Anything that we think we own, including qualities, anything we think we have, our body, any qualities we think we have, it's not the real thing. It's a reflection of the real thing. So it's not only is it on loan, it's not something that we permanently have. These things that we have the illusion of being in control of. It's not even the real thing. So not only is it temporary, but it's also false. It's a reflection of what's really existing elsewhere. So anything we have, like I said, even if it's qualities, they're all on loan and they're all facsimiles. So we are distinct individuals. So that's true. Spirit, soul, we're individuals eternally, but we are dependent. We're eternally dependent on the Supreme Lord. Of course, we do have free will, which is the extent of our minute independence. So there's some independence there, but it's minute. But even that is limited to its binary function, right? There's only two options. We can choose to serve Krishna, or we can choose to forget Krishna and serve our senses. And that's it, right? There's no third option. We like to think that there are the unlimited choices here, right? That we can choose to serve our senses in so many different ways, right? And this kind of expands our idea of what free will could be potentially. Right? People say the opportunities are endless, right? But there's two things. First off, our options are limited by our karma, right? So we could want to do so many different things, but if we don't have the accumulated karma to actually do those things, we can't really do them. We can only do them in a fantasy within a fantasy world, right? And secondly, it doesn't matter how we pursue our forgetfulness of Krishna. It just matters that we are doing it, right? So in the grand scheme of things, there's only two options, right? So we are the ego, the pure ego. But then there's also the false ego, the ahankara. So when we misuse our free will, we're identifying with this false ego, the ahankara, and we think I am controller, I am enjoyer. When we purify that consciousness and we deal with the real ego, the real sense of identity, we identify, instead of I am enjoyer, controller, it's I am servant of Krishna, eternal servant of Krishna, right? So there's these two options, and that's to serve Krishna or to forget Krishna, serve the senses. And we are free to explore the illusory independent option for as long as we want. We're free to do that, right? To pursue our happiness. But we cannot explore the genuine option until we are naturally, completely, with no trace of doubt. We're outside of attachment, no karma, no jnana, in a purely natural state of Krishna consciousness. And that is the state that's described in the previous verse, where Uddhava was explaining to Vidura how it was impossible for him to bear separation from the lotus feet of the master. Right, so this is what it means by Krishna consciousness, and this is the path that we're on. And we see here where we are in our study of Srimad Bhagavatam. This is where Krishna is winding up his earthly pastimes, right? He's fulfilled his purpose here on this planet, and he and his associates are leaving Earth in various different ways. So currently in our study, we're hearing about the incident with the Yadu dynasty, drinking the sake, picking up the iron-infused reeds, and the curse that led up to it. So that's what we're studying now. Previously, during our study of the first canto, we heard about how the Pandavas retired timely after this particular incident took place. So they heard that Krishna was winding up his pastimes, he's gone. And so they too felt as if this world was not worth living in without the presence of Krishna. Now, of course, they're pure devotees. They can see Krishna everywhere. But having had his personal association, they were eager to leave this world behind, of course, in good hands. They left Maharaj Parikshit, qualified leader, and go off to continue their direct personal service to Krishna, right? Once one has that, you don't want to leave it behind. You can't, right? And so this is Krishna consciousness. All right, so this leads to another concept that we hear this type of thing often, right? Some people say, well, Krishna is present everywhere and with everything. They'll even quote verses to prove that Krishna is within everything. So there's no need to go to the temple. There's no need to chant. There's no need, I can enjoy Krishna anywhere, at home or at a sporting event or at a movie or a concert. And of course, it is possible to be absorbed in Krishna in any such event. But those who are serious about serving Krishna, they tend to pursue activities that they know Krishna likes, and they tend to want to always learn more about him, not just appreciate him in the background for providing us with entertainment and comfort and daily bread, but actually understanding what he likes, what his character is, right? So in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 10, verse 9, Machchita madgata prana, bodhayanta praspram, katayantas chamam nityam tushanti cha, ramanti cha. The thoughts of my pure devotees dwell in me. Their lives are dedicated to my service, and they derive great satisfaction and bliss from always enlightening one another and conversing about me. So this is the tendency. It's not that we just say, oh yeah, no, Krishna is everywhere. We enjoy our senses, and then we give him lip service. Thank you, Krishna, for making this experience so enjoyable. Thank you, Krishna, for putting food on the table. Thank you, Krishna, for serving me. Thank you, Krishna, for serving me. This is the conditioned tendency, but the constitutional tendency is, Krishna, how can I serve you? How can I make you happy? What can I do that's going to entertain you or give you comfort or like that? So it goes the other direction from being conditional to constitutional, right? So there you could see there's two options there: serve Krishna or forget Krishna and serve the senses, right? And as we pointed out earlier, our external activities will not necessarily determine which of these two things we are doing, right? Forgetting Krishna or remembering it. It's quite possible to engage in strange, seemingly non-devotional activity while being completely absorbed in Krishna consciousness. And it's also quite possible to engage in activities which externally look fully connected to Krishna while being completely absorbed in sense gratification. Both of those options are quite possible. So although there are certain activities which we will tend to pursue, by the two different parties, the spiritualists will tend to pursue certain activities and the materialists will tend to pursue other activities. Although that can be a general phenomenon, one cannot make an accurate distinction based merely on external activities, right? But what we can do, so in other words, we shouldn't judge what someone, based on what someone's doing, we shouldn't try to assume what their consciousness is. But what we can do is, for ourselves, we can try to engage in the proper activities, the ones that are recommended in Shastras. And more importantly, we can cultivate the proper mood in which to perform these activities by associating with the guru and the other sadhus. And if we do that with sincere and unrelenting determination, Krishna will reward us with the clarity we need to make educated choices that will benefit our progress in Krishna consciousness. Right? This is the process of Cheto Darpana Marjanam. When we're chanting Krishna's name, and we're doing so sincerely, hopefully without offenses, then Krishna grants us clarity. He cleanses the mirror of our hearts so that we can actually see through the illusion right to the reality. This is a gradual process, of course. But when we see things more clearly, we still have this opportunity, this free will, that we can either take advantage of that clarity and do the right thing according to our constitutional position, or we can say, yeah, that's a good idea. I understand that it's important, it's valuable, but right now, I'm going to pursue this other aspect of my life. We may even try to justify it as the responsible thing to do, right? Yes, that's going to be very important once I, finish with my career or my family or whatever the case may be, not understanding that the right choice will actually benefit both, right? Both the your duties in this world and also your conditional duties and your constitutional ones. So we always have that option to turn our backs on Krishna, right? But we won't always be tempted to entertain that option, right? Although free will is always present, at some point when we become attached to Krishna, when we become Krishna conscious, when we can't tolerate a moment of separation without him, then that other option it's not really an option anymore. Although it's present, it's no longer considered as an option, right? And I mean that actually, not just in theory, not just theoretically. You know, we all know in theory that there's no true enjoyment in the material world. We all know that in theory. But when I say this, when I say that it's no longer an option for us to turn our backs, I mean actually, there's not even a thought, not even a consideration that we're entertaining to do anything separate from Krishna. When we get to this state, that is Krishna consciousness. Again, not being able to bear a moment of separation from him. And again, this has been coming up a lot recently, but it also comes up throughout Bhagavatam quite frequently. So, as it turns out, true renunciation is just relentless attachment to Krishna, right? And once that is established, everything else seems pale and unattractive, inconsequential, right? So then there's true detachment from anything that's not Krishna. Attachment to Krishna is detachment to everything else. Okay, so let me stop here and see if there are any questions or comments or additions that anyone would like to contribute. There are very many great souls in this call today. We're quite fortunate. So please, Vishnu Gadaprabhu, you have your hand raised, please.
Hare Krishna. Thank you. So you're mentioning about how for us, for the conditioned souls, renunciation is kind of a joke. Could you
Ultimately,
clarify? Yeah, could you clarify that a little bit? Because of course in ISKCON
yes.
we have people who are called sannyasis, and we may not want to think that they're jokes. You follow?
No.
You
Yes.
follow?
Thank you. Yes, I do. Thank you for that. What I meant to say when I say that the idea of renunciation is a joke, I mean for us, because we don't truly own anything. Now, there are, of course, proper renunciates who understand that everything belongs to Krishna. So those who take sannyas, they're meant to have that understanding, and many of them do. So we can look up to these true renunciates who engage everything properly in Krishna's service. In that sense, they are detached from it, and they know that Krishna owns it. What I meant by renunciation in this material world as a joke is the idea that we think we're renounced. Because the sannyasis, they don't think they're renounced. They just know that everything is Krishna's, and they're using it accordingly. So that's the sense. That there's a difference between renunciation and sannyas, actually. That's given there in Bhagavad Gita. So it's not that we shouldn't try to become detached, that it's a joke to try to become detached. It's a joke to think that we own something and we can become detached from it. Thank you for asking me to clarify that. That's a very important thing. Is that clear enough, or
Yeah,
is there
yeah. I'm
something
just. I agree with. Thank you for that clarification. So
Okay.
the sannyasi is renouncing the false conception that they're the proprietor and the enjoyer.
Yes.
And satnyas. Okay, thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. That was a very important thing to add. Anyone else?
Hare Krishna Carucandra Prabhu. This is a very nice class. Thank you. It's Vrindavan.
Hare
Sorry.
Krishna. Oh, Hare Krishna.
So I think this is a really really great topic, and I really appreciated what you were saying about that we could be one could be out in the world and doing activities, and it may or may not be, you know, with the right consciousness, and one could be doing the same in the temple, and you know that we can't ever know someone's consciousness. And I think, you know, I think you have some really great advice there, which is stay close to, you know, the activities that are known to be, you know, at least trying to put one in that state of consciousness. Because really, I think, you know, it is Krishna consciousness, and we're striving to always be seeing everything around us is Krishna's domain, and we're just servants to that. Would that be correct to say that everything, if our consciousness would be true to Krishna consciousness, then everything we see is Krishna's, and if we're serving Krishna, we're serving Krishna's, you know, domain out externally, serving him domain in the temple, because the consciousness is what matters the most. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, it's the consciousness that we're trying to develop. So sometimes the activities may not reflect what's actually going on inside. And oftentimes it's like that, because not only are there, and we're warned about pretenders, not only are there pretenders, but there are also people, like these pretenders are actually actively trying to cheat people by pretending to be. But then there are also those of us who we mean well, we're sincere, we want to become better, but we don't have a full understanding yet. And so we make mistakes because the mind will take any information and try to use it to our advantage. So they'll take, the mind, for example, will take excerpts from the Shastra, right? And put them through the filter of our conditioned nature, and we'll have a very different take on what the Shastra is saying than what it is actually saying. So when I was mentioning that it's important for us to seek out these activities which are designed to elevate our consciousness, I also mentioned that it's more important to understand how to do those properly, how to develop the proper consciousness in doing those activities. Because we can be in a position where, although externally we're doing all of the right things according to the process that's laid out in the Shastra, we could be doing them with the wrong intentions. Maybe we're doing them because we want to be recognized as a highly advanced spiritual leader, or maybe we're doing them, there's so many other different reasons we could do them. Or maybe that's not even on our radar, the whole spiritual part. Maybe we're just trying to gratify our senses, right? It can be just that. So there are so many gradations of where we can fit into that. So the important thing that I always try to drive home is we can't judge anyone based on external activities, but we can follow the advice of the Shastra to engage ourselves in specific activities, but more importantly, to do them properly, right? So with the advice of the Guru and the sadhus, make sure that not only are we doing the right things, but we're doing them in the right way, so that Krishna will grant us this clarity. And so when Krishna grants us that clarity, we'll actually have the intelligence to make the right decision, right? To do it then and now, right? When Krishna gives us that clarity that, okay, this is something that you should do and this is something that you should give up. We shouldn't say, I believe you, I agree with you, but not just yet, right? I want to do this first, right? And so this is the very important thing. And this is the process of Krishna consciousness. If we're sincere and diligently determined, then Krishna sees that and he gives us that clarity. But then we still have that opportunity, that free will. We can take it and utilize it properly, or we can say, okay, yes, but not just yet. And when we do that, when we say yes, but not just yet, then it pauses our growth. Of course, there's no diminution or loss. Again, I've mentioned many times, we can lose access to where we've been due to offenses, but once we successfully get back on the path, we pick up where we left off. So in that sense, there's no diminution or loss. But it doesn't mean that there's always going to be growth. And of course, Krishna is ever expanding. So if we're staying still, we're actually kind of being left behind in that sense, right? So we want to always be connected. We want to always be making progress. And to do that, we have to be diligent. We have to be determined. We have to, again, Bhagavad Gita 10:9. Our thoughts have to be constantly engaged in serving Krishna. We have to be engaging and conversing and enlightening one another about him. So these are the activities that we should do. So generally, when we read these verses, we wish that they described our activities. But if we're real with ourselves, we say, okay, although I like doing some of these things, a lot of my day is dedicated to doing something else, right? A lot of my day is dedicated to serving my senses and making sure that I'm comfortable, right? It's not relying on Krishna to provide those things if he wants to, or if he doesn't want me to be comfortable, then that's okay too, right? And that's the true renunciation. And that's a gradual process to get from where we are to where we need to be, this actual idea of sannyas. But luckily, thankfully, we have this very clear process that we can follow. And if we follow it properly, successfully, under the right guidance, and accepting Krishna's mercy, then we can make our way through it and become successful. Did that answer that? Or did I go ahead?
It did. It was
Yeah.
great. It was a beautiful answer. And just to follow up then, so how do I check myself? How do I know
where, you know, like I think I'm doing all this great service and I'm amazing. And, you know, like how do I check myself?
Great question. Guru Sadhu Shastra. So there's a verse in the 5th canto, it's 5, 12, 18, 5th canto, 12th chapter, verse 18. I think it's Prahlad Maharaj speaking, and he's explaining, and Srila Prabhupada quotes this very often. He doesn't always give the reference, but he'll paraphrase this verse. And the translation is that that all of the qualities of the demigods become present in someone who's engaging in devotional service. Knowledge, detachment, all of these things automatically come. So if we see that these qualities that are listed, and there are so many different lists of qualities that we can see, if we see that these qualities aren't truly gradually becoming manifest within ourselves, then we're not actually making that advancement, right? We may be trying, that may be our intention, but if these qualities aren't gradually popping up, and not as a side thing, you know, in other words, we don't want to independently try to develop these qualities. That's also a futile pursuit, because as I mentioned before, any qualities that we have, first of all, they're on loan, and second of all, they're facsimiles. So we'd have to actually, in order to get these things, we'd have to do karma to earn them. We don't want to do that independently, but these qualities come automatically, naturally. So we pursue the spiritual path as recommended by the Guru and the Sadhu, all written out in the Shastra. And if we do that properly, we will see that these qualities are gradually increasing within us. And if we don't see that, then we have to find out, okay, what offenses am I making? What am I doing wrong? Because it's a science, right? In science, there's a very specific formula that you have to follow. If one of those aspects are out of order or not ideal, then you get a different result. You may get a similar result, but it won't be the ideal result. So we have to see. Like I said, there are many terms that we sort of misdefine, like sadhu sangha, for example. Sadhu sangha actually means to identify, imbibe the sat principle, the eternal principle that is being displayed by a sadhu, right? And to actually identify with that and grow in that direction toward that constitutional nature. If that exchange isn't actually happening, it's not sadhu sangha or sat sangha. You may be in proximity with other aspiring spiritualists, and they may be giving you that proper example. But if you're not actually taking it and associating, meaning the word association actually means to bring it on as yourself and to represent it, right? To identify with it. Associate means to identify. So if we're not identifying with that sat nature that is given by the example of the devotees, it's actually not sadhu sangha. The elements are there for sadhu sangha, but if that exchange isn't there in that upward movement, then it's not sadhu sangha. So what I've seen is that people will just hang out with other aspiring transcendentalists, but the talk isn't really enlivening. They're not enlivening and conversing about Krishna exclusively, right? There may be some of that, there may be mention, and so if we consider that sadhu sangha, and then we wonder why we're not making advancement, for example, then that's actually the reason. If these other qualities aren't automatically becoming manifest as promised in Bhagavatam, then it means there's something that we're not doing right. So the more we understand Shastra, the more we associate with the Guru and take his instructions and follow the examples of the sadhus, the clearer it becomes by Krishna's mercy what we should actually be doing. Because as you mentioned, sometimes it's not clear. How am I to know if I'm making advancement or not? But all the answers are given there, Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. And the beauty of it is Krishna doesn't just hit us in the face with it like a brick and say, all right, here's exactly everything you need to do to become a pure devotee. It's all there, it's presented to us, but he presents it to us gradually so that we can, as we are able to accept it, right? So that we can make gradual process without being so too intimidating. So it's essentially on us to take advantage of what's there. Everything is there. Everything we need to go back to Godhead has been presented by Srila Prabhupada and has been handed down to us by our gurus and is being shown in the examples of the sadhus. But the clarity to actually have the intelligence to make that right decision, that comes from sincerity, dedication, and relentless determination. And that also becomes cultivated when we follow this process of Krishna consciousness. Did that answer that aspect?
Super helpful. Thank you. That was wonderful.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Is there anything else? We have a Hare Krishna in the chat. Hare Krishna. Jai. Dronacharya Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Chandra Prabhu. Thank you for a wonderful class.
Thank you.
Can you speak a little bit about the renunciation, or like the pattern of renunciation sometimes comes when we first get exposed to Krishna consciousness? When we first hear
Yes.
that, like there's a spiritual world, I'm not this body. Therefore,
Yeah.
we jump to conclusions like, well, you're really not my parents then, or, and you start separating yourself from a lot of your material relationships.
Yes.
And how do we kind of go through that stage in a healthy way?
Yeah, and we think renunciation is so easy in the beginning. We see a list of things that we shouldn't be doing and a list of things we should be doing, and we just say it's that simple, done, right? And we wonder why all these senior devotees aren't just, strictly following it, right? Pure devotee syndrome when we first come. So we tend to try to just prematurely cut off association with who we consider to be materialists, family, friends, relatives, coworkers. But the actual idea of cutting off the association, again, the word association means to identify with. So it doesn't mean that you stop being in proximity or communicating with them. It means you stop identifying with those things that you know to be asat, not eternal principles. Things that are a waste of time, you understand. I'm not going to identify with that. But I can identify with, everyone has at least some aspect of the Sat principle that you can learn from, right? We read in the 11th canto, of Srimad Bhagavatam, how we can learn from the gurus in nature. There's always a lesson that we can learn from someone. So if we take that into consideration, first of all, Krishna can speak to us through anyone. That doesn't mean that we should just talk to everyone, but if we have relations that are established, family, friends, relatives, everyone's put into our life for a reason. It's part of our conditioning, but it's also something that we have to consider that it could also be a very constitutional reason, right? So we have to take any and all opportunities, not only for preaching, because honestly, generally, when you hear this, the general answer is you don't have to take the association, but you should give yours. And there's a lot of value to that statement. But there's also some value in the fact that you can also take some. You just have to know what to take. And in order to determine what is takeable and what is not, and how to actually give association, not just to fanatically be spouting off verses, but to understand how communication works, how relationships work, and to gradually introduce these Sat principles into our conversations with these people. If we can understand that, and that comes again through study of Shastra and learning from the sadhus and the guru, then, like I said, we can be in external situations that seem, iffy, but we can be in proper consciousness. And in time, if we can successfully do that and show Krishna that despite all of the, nonsense karmis that I'm surrounded by, I can still be determined to serve you and to find whatever way I possibly can to see you in all of these things and to make advancement. And so if we could see that, then Krishna will give us the opportunity to escape such things, right? But when we prematurely just try to cut these things off, we do so A, for the wrong reason, and B, a lot of times we're throwing away something that actually has some value. And oftentimes, as we've observed many times, since there's still attachment there, eventually people just go back to it. They go back to the things that they have previously, cut off out of their lives. Is that address that, or is there something more?
Yes, no, I thank you for explaining that.
Or Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains that there are different kinds of false renunciation. So there's the monkey renunciation. So the monkeys, they live in the forest, they're naked, they don't have any possessions, right? So there are some renunciates who also, they renounce their clothes, they're in the forest. But like the monkeys, they're just chasing around the she-monkeys and they're trying to enjoy their senses. So even though they're renounced in one sense, they've given up their cloth and they've given up worldly possessions like, a house and whatever, still they're attached to sense enjoyment and they're just chasing that around. So that's one type of false renunciate. Then there's also the occasional renunciate. This is also known as the smasana vairagya, the renunciation that you feel at a crematorium. So and we find this too, when we lose someone that we love, we understand, oh, this life is quite temporary, right? It hits us, it hits home. And all of a sudden we have this sense of renunciation, like, oh, we have to become serious about spiritual life because, at any moment this can be taken away. But unfortunately, many times this realization, this renunciation, it doesn't last very long because we still have all these, the mind is still trying to tell us, yeah, but come on, you still have time. You can enjoy this, you can do it. Plus, this kind of enjoyment's not that bad. It's, it's practically Krishna consciousness. So you can go ahead and do it, right? The mind's very tricky like that. So there's the occasional renunciation. Then there's also the imitative renunciation, where we were talking before about the cheaters who they'll put on all of the external garb of a Vaishnava, but they won't even have the intention of ever making spiritual advancement. They just want to get followers and money and things like that, right? So there's all these different types of false renunciation. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains them in several of his works, but they all come under the category of Palgu Vairagya, false renunciation. And so then the true renunciation is just understanding, that, as we mentioned before with Vishnu Gadaprabhu's question, or his query for clarification, is that true renunciation is actually understanding whom everything belongs to, and then using all of those things as such. So if I know that something's not mine, I'm not going to misuse it, right? I want to find out, okay, how is it actually meant to be used by the person who's, providing it? That's the responsible thing to do. And so the Vedas gives us, the Shastras, it gives us the proper understanding of how to use all of these different things around us. Is that, sometimes I go off on these tangents. I don't even know if that had anything to do with what you were asking. So
No, it brings the context to the conversation. I think it's really helpful. I had I was talking to a parent of a young devotee a couple months ago, and she was, really like concerned. Oh my gosh, my son, it's like he's just like completely different. He he got rid of all his clothes. He has like 2 t-shirts and 1 pair of pants. Like that's all it's all he does. He wakes up really early. He's like kind of cut off communication with the family unless we're talking about God. And I was talking to her about that. This is a natural phase, like that he's going through, but he'll move through this. Like, don't worry. Like he's that this initial enthusiasm, this utsaha, this it's almost like a stage that many of us just go through in Krishna consciousness. But like as you were explaining, like once you start seeing, once the knowledge, the knowledge and the balance of that knowledge gets, and how we apply it in the world, we begin to then integrate once again. So this is something that's experienced, quite often, over and over, both in our lives as well as we see in others, and helping others go through that initial stage, and those around them to help them understand. It's helpful to have, perspective on this topic.
Yeah, and the important thing you mentioned, he'll move through it. The important thing is that we move through it in the right direction, right?
Right.
Because oftentimes we see that people just move through it in the wrong direction. They realize what they did was, either premature or fanatical or whatever, and they sort of overcorrect the situation. Because we have good intentions when we do this to try to cut off that which is not God conscious, but we don't have an understanding of actually what is God conscious and what is not. It's like that's the neophyte understanding, is we can't determine actually what is what. So everyone will actually move through the phase, but in which direction they're going to move through it, that depends on the association that we keep, and how seriously we take this process. Because oftentimes people move through it in the opposite direction, and they're just like, oh man, I was such a fanatic, and that whole thing is, it's like a cult. You can go through it that way too. Like, yeah, they were trying to get me to do all these things, and you hear these stories, and it's quite believable, and you think, oh yeah, man, maybe it is a cult, right? You hear things like this, and the way people behave, and like that. So yeah, we have to understand it. We have to have a healthy understanding, and this is why Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, these things, they can't be emphasized enough how important they are. They are our life and soul, our guidance. Otherwise, Shruti, Smriti, Puranadi, Panchatra, Vedin, Vina, even if we have good intentions to serve Krishna, if we're not following the advice that's given in the Shastra, then we're creating unnecessary disturbance in society, right? Even if we have good intentions. And then that's not to speak anything of those who don't have good intentions. They're going to cause even more unnecessary disturbances in society, right? So it can't be emphasized enough how important to all of us Shastra is in some form. Some of us, like Mother Vindhyavali has mentioned many times, and rightfully so, aren't necessarily the scholastic types that can just sit down and read books, but she also very much appreciates hearing, right? And so that's also Shastra coming in, right? If you're hearing from an authorized representative, the principles of what's in the Shastra is being given, right? So anyone, one who knows, or just as the purpose of a small well can be served by a reservoir, so the purpose of the Vedas can be known, or can be provided by one who knows the actual purpose behind it. And the purpose of the Vedas is to know Krishna. Vedaishtra sarvamaham eva vedyo. So hearing from someone that actually understands that principle is non-different than hearing from the Shastra, because all of the aspects of Shastra are gone through that. Now, on the other hand, because you got to look at both extremes, and they're not the only options, but they're the two extremes. So that's the one. You don't even have to necessarily have the book in front of you if you're hearing from an authorized source. That's the one. The other thing is you can have the book in front of you and still miss the point, right? So that's the other extreme. We like to be somewhere in the middle where we have the Shastra, we're hearing from the authorized representatives, and we're getting the point, right? We don't want to misuse Shastra in any way. And we also don't want to just limit the knowledge of the Shastra. In other words, if we find someone, Tadvini Pranipatana, we find someone who has seen the truth and we approach them, that's how we understand Shastra. It's not that I say, no, I don't need anybody else. I have the book, right? I'll figure it out on my own. This consciousness, this is self-consciousness. If you're trying to figure it out on your own, you've missed the whole point of Krishna consciousness, right? Krishna wants you to find someone who's seen the truth and learn from them. It's relationship. So once you understand the relationship, who you are, and what the relationship is between you and Krishna and everyone else, the servants of Krishna, we're meant to play well together. In the spiritual world, everything is harmonious, right? There's no conflict because everyone is focused on Krishna, right? And so we have to get that's the concept that we have to understand. And it only comes through the spiritual master, right? That's why the spiritual master is so important. And we talked about that. Maybe it was over a month ago. Yeah. when we were talking about this verse of how the spiritual master, he plants this seed in the heart, but it also says that it's inherent. So how can something that's inherent be then put into the heart? So we talked about that concept and how sometimes it's hard to determine, well, how exactly does that work? If it's already there, if it's part of my eternal nature, then how is the spiritual master putting it there? But of course, to explain that even though it's there and it's inherent, the only way for it to actually sprout, just like all of the fragrances that exist are present in the earth, but only come out when certain seeds are planted. In the same way, although this bhakti is certainly inherent within us, going through the spiritual master is an important aspect to actually make it blossom and grow, because that is the rasa that we want, the bliss that we're searching for. It's a personal thing. It's a relationship. And we have to become comfortable with and embrace the idea that we're not the controller and that somebody else has to help us, right? And so eventually that's Krishna, but he does that through the spiritual master. So that's all there, and that we can all, but in order to understand that, in order to come to that realization, the actual realization, not just theoretically knowing, is to engage in study of Shastra, association of devotees, and following the instructions of the spiritual master. Did I go on a tangent again, or was that pertinent to what we were talking about? Sometimes I don't know.
That's very pertinent.
You're always very kind, and you say it was pertinent. Thank you.
No, it was. I mean, and
Okay.
again, I think the more we add context to the situation, as it brings depth to it. So I appreciate it.
Okay,
I can
good.
speak for myself.
Good.
I wanted to mention that today we're observing the disappearance day of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. The program will begin at the temple in about an hour at 10 o'clock. And I request everybody, if you're unable to attend the program, to please spend the day having some reflection about the contribution into your own life and into this world of His Divine Grace, and offer some, words of gratitude, to Srila Prabhupada, and reflect on the importance of the human form of life and how he's given us a chance to transcend it. Thank you. Hare Krishna. And also, I see Mother Sudamini has, she's no longer on the call, I believe. It was great it was really great to see her, and I wanted to convey to her that if she ever wanted to, address the Assembly of Devotees here in Philadelphia and speak, we'd be more than happy to have her, host her, and hear from her.
I'll let her know.
Yeah.
Good.
It'll be our great honor.
Jai.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll end here. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai.
Bhagavatam ki jai.
Jai.
Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai.
Jai.
Vanchakalpatarubhyasya kripasindhubhyo patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much, Prabhu.
Hare
Nice
Krishna.
class.
Charu Chandra Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.